This is something that happened to me and my cousin a few years back, and I swear it's true. I don't really talk about it much because people either don't believe me or they just think I'm messing with them. But I know what we saw, and it still freaks me out when I think about it. So, we used to go camping a lot, me and my cousin Dave. We'd head out to this spot in Michigan, out near the Manistee National Forest. The place is huge, with miles and miles of dense woods, and we always loved how quiet and remote it was. No cell service, barely any people, just us and nature. This one weekend, we decided to camp out near this clearing we found a few months before. It was perfect, tucked away, surrounded by trees, but open enough that you could see the stars at night. We set up camp, had a fire going, and were just hanging out like usual. Around 11 p.m., we decided to call it a night. I climbed into the tent. Dave stayed up a little longer to finish his beer, and everything felt totally normal. At about 2 a.m., I woke up to this weird feeling. You know how sometimes you just know something's not right? The fire was almost out and the woods were dead silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing. It was so quiet it felt wrong. I sat up and looked around, thinking maybe a bear or something was nearby, but there wasn't any movement. That's when I saw Dave, just standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the woods. I called out to him, asked what he was doing, and he didn't answer. He just stood there facing the trees, completely still. I got out of the tent and walked over, but before I got to him, he suddenly snapped out of it, like he hadn't realized I was even there. I asked him what was up, and he just looked at me, confused, and said, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard anything, so I asked him what he meant, and he said he'd been hearing this growling noise. Low, deep, but it wasn't like any animal he recognized. He thought maybe it was a wolf or something, but it sounded off. Like it wasn't just coming from one spot. He said it felt like the sound was moving around us. We both stood there for a minute, listening, but all I could hear was the silence. I told him it was probably just his imagination, and we should head back to the tent. As soon as I said that, we heard this snapping sound, like a branch breaking, and something heavy moving through the woods, but fast. We both turned toward the sound, and that's when we saw it. Standing just inside the tree line, maybe 50 feet away, was this thing. At first, I thought it was a bear, but then it stepped forward, and we saw it wasn't. It was tall, easily 7 feet, standing on two legs but hunched with these long arms that hung low. And its head, it looked like a wolf or a dog, but wrong. Its snout was too long, its eyes were glowing this sickly yellow, and its ears were pointed, almost like a German shepherd's. But its body was massive, covered in dark fur, and its chest was heaving like it had just run miles. We just stood there, frozen, staring at it. I could feel this raw, primal fear. It was like every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. But we couldn't move. It didn't make any noise, just stood there, watching us. Then it took a step forward, and that's when I saw its legs. They were like a dog's, bent backward, but too muscular, too long for any normal animal. I whispered to Dave, "Don't run." I don't know why I said it, but I just knew if we ran, it would chase us. But I could feel Dave panicking next to me. His breathing got faster, and before I could stop him, he turned and bolted back toward the tent. The second he moved, that thing let out this sound, this horrible, strange growl, and lunged forward. It was fast, faster than anything I've ever seen. I thought for sure it was going to get him. But right before it reached the clearing, it stopped, like there was some invisible line it couldn't cross. It just paced back and forth, its eyes locked on us, growling, like it was frustrated or something. Dave made it to the tent, grabbed his keys, and we both sprinted for the truck. I don't know how we made it, but we jumped in, locked the doors, and peeled out of there as fast as we could. The last thing I saw as we sped off was that thing standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us leave. It just stood there staring like it was letting us go. We haven't been back to that spot since. I've tried to find some explanations. Maybe it was a bear or someone in a costume, but deep down, I know what we saw. That thing wasn't an animal. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. And the scariest part is, I know it's still out there, somewhere in those woods.